Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes pretty fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the third anniversary show of The Straight Shift. I cannot believe it has been 3 years since I started this podcast. Time really flies. I started the podcast with an episode about holiday car shopping. The end of the year is usually a great time to buy a new car. The holiday deals frequently offer some of the biggest discounts of the year due to a combination of the special manufacturer incentives, salespeople are getting bonuses for the end of the year, dealers are wanting to make their annual sales quotas, as well as get rid of the old model year inventory that may still be on their lot. So the end of the year is a fantastic time of the year to buy a new car, right? But this is 2020, so all bets are off. So today I want to talk about holiday car shopping strategies 2020 edition because nothing is normal this year. We're living in this alternate reality. So I wanted to go through what is the situation right now in the automotive industry thanks to COVID, and how is that going to affect the holiday end of year car buying deals, and what your shopping strategy should be if you are in the market for a new vehicle before year end. So let's get started. The end of this year is still going to be a good time to buy a new car, but it's also going to be different than, quote, normal, because nothing has been normal this year, right? So here's what's happened over the course of this year that's going to make 2020 holiday car shopping a little bit different than previous years. First of all, inventory levels are low still, especially for many really popular makes and models. So here's what happened. If you'll recall back in April when most of us were still in lockdown and freaking out because we didn't know much about this virus other than it was spreading rapidly and killing people, I made some predictions about what I thought was going to happen in the automotive industry based on the pandemic. What were the impacts going to be? And I predicted that we were going to shift from the inventory surplus that the dealers found themselves in back in the spring because they had all these cars sitting on their lots, but nobody was car shopping because we were all sitting at home freaking out, right? So sales just bottomed out in March and April. I was literally the top salesperson for one of the local Subaru stores back in April. I sold more cars for them than their salespeople did. It was really it was very sad, but I was happy to be able to help them out. And most of the dealers across the country were experiencing this depending on the level of lockdown in their area. But bottom line, car sales March and April this year totally sucked. But I also predicted that as the restrictions started to lift, we would see a pendulum shift from an inventory surplus to an inventory shortage. Because I knew when people finally were let out of their houses, they were going to be like, I got to get out of here. And they were going to start shopping like crazy. Well, I was right. That happened. What I didn't anticipate, and what I don't think any of the dealers really anticipated, was just how much pent-up demand there would be from car shoppers. So June and July were record sales months for many dealers across the country, most of the dealers that I know. And that was because there were good incentives from the manufacturers, particularly good finance incentives, 0% APRs with deferred payments to try and help people who were being financially impacted by the pandemic. But also people were realizing, well, crap, we're not going on vacation this year, are we? So they started putting that money that they would normally spend on a family summer vacation into things like their home. Like you cannot find a swimming pool designer and installer, at least in Charlotte, that can do anything for like the next 2 years. Everybody's booked up. It's crazy. So, Lowe's and Home Depot and all those stores sold like crazy. Everybody started putting their money into their homes, but they also started putting that money, if they had it, towards buying a new car, because they realized, well, if we're going to get to go anywhere at all as a family, we're going to be driving. maybe we can drive to the beach, or we can drive to the mountains, or we can just take a big road trip just to get out of the house. They weren't necessarily getting on a plane. And certainly in my case, I wasn't getting on any cruise ships. So that money got spent on cars. So take that now into August, there were not any cars left because production of new cars had also been shut down in the spring. There were several months when literally production, not just of the cars themselves, but of all of the component parts and pieces and bits that go into making a car, globally shut down. Everything really came to a screeching halt. So with a lack of new cars, people started buying up the used ones. Well, the used ones, we weren't seeing new used cars, if that makes sense, come back into the market because a lot of people who had leased vehicles simply extended their leases. And you can extend a lease up to 6 months. And that's what a lot of people did. Or they just bought out their lease and kept that car. So most of the good used cars that you see coming onto the market every year are off-lease vehicles. Well, things were not coming off lease and being put back into the market. So new cars, used cars, there was not diddly squat out there for inventory in August. Now you have to add in the model year changeover that for most manufacturers starts happening in August, September, sometimes into the fall. Depends on the make and model. But that's a time when the plants are shifting over their production floors to the new models, especially if there's a big redesign. That takes a lot more effort than to simply switch over to a model that's not really changing very much. Well, of course, all this got delayed. So many of the 2021s were not being spit out of the manufacturing plants like they normally would. The model years were delayed. Some of them have been delayed actually into 2021. There are some 2021 models that we are not going to start getting until next year, as late as spring, maybe even early summer for a few things like the new Ford Bronco. So the supply chain was just a humongous mess. So usually by the end of September, most dealers, their inventory comprises about 25% of the new model inventory and about 75% of the outgoing models. So there's still good sales. This year, 3%. Literally 3% of most dealers' inventory was the new models. Obviously, it varies by make and model, but suffice it to say that we just don't have the inventory levels that we normally do. So new car sales, after going completely nuts in June and July, have tapered off. And August was really, really tight. Most dealers started to see significant drops, 20, 25%, because they didn't have anything to sell. It wasn't that the demand let up. It didn't. People still wanted to buy, but there wasn't anything to buy, at least not in the good popular models. There was still some junk out there, but the good stuff, the popular models, they were gone. Some dealers literally had 30% of the cars on their lot that they would normally have to sell. So when you don't have anything to sell, your sales go down. So it's just kind of been this big mess. And it's like I said, it's not just the cars themselves. We're still seeing a tightness in the global supply chain of all of the pieces and parts and components that go into building a car. So the auto manufacturers, they don't actually manufacture every little piece of that car. They're more auto assemblers, and they outsource the actual manufacturing of many of their components, from everything from the sensors, the infotainment systems, all the computers and screens, the airbags, even the paint. Those all come from different suppliers. So one of the big challenges any time of the year is getting all those supply chain items lined up in time for your production schedule. And it's just been a huge cluster, pardon my French, all year, because that whole global supply chain has been completely and utterly foobarred. And it's going to take time for it to settle back down and get back to a normal rhythm. And that's assuming that we don't repeat all this crap in 2021, which there's a good chance that could happen. So we have a very unusual combination of economic factors going into the holiday car shopping season this year. We have dealers that really they are desperate to make sales because they're down 20 to 25% on the year. They need to make those quotas. The salespeople, need to make some money. And they're worried about what's going to happen in 2021 because COVID's not going away. We don't really know what's going to happen going into next year, sadly. Yet they still have limited inventory in most cases, and they're not sure how that's going to shake out either. So we have a lot of unknowns, but a strange combination of dealers desperately wanting to make sales, but not necessarily having a whole lot to sell. The inventory situation has gotten better over the last month, at least for a lot of makes and models. It really depends on where that specific vehicle was produced in the world. Did it come out of a plant in Japan? Did it come out of a plant in Canada? Did it come out of a plant in Germany? Did it come out of a plant in Kentucky or Illinois or South Carolina? Cars are made all over the world, and depending on where that particular city had shutdown problems and coronavirus problems and what their production schedule ended up being, that's going to determine whether that make and model has inventory, along with what has been the demand for it. Things like the Subaru Forester, that's a really hot selling car. They're super popular. Fortunately, they're made in Japan and the supply chain is getting better on it, but they've just been so popular. So that's a model that they can be hard to come by. So again, it really, really depends on exactly which make and model you are looking for as to whether or not car is still going to be available. And are you looking at a 2020 leftover, or are the 2021s already on the lot? So how is all this craziness going to affect the quote sales and the incentives for the end of the year that are advertised by the manufacturers and that we see all these crazy commercials for? Well, fortunately, those incentives traditionally start coming out in November. You don't really have to wait to December to get an idea of what the holiday sales events are going to be like. This is why I always recommend you start your holiday car shopping in November, because very often the incentives are the same. They might get better for December, they might not. So this year, we're still going to have incentives because, the dealers, what inventory they do have, they definitely want to sell. They want to make those numbers. But don't expect there to be fire sales, especially on the makes and models that have been selling well and that have inventory shortages. And that's really true any time of year we just have the strange inventory situation. I think we're going to have a lot more financial incentives, low APRs, 0% APRs, great lease deals, than we will really large rebates. And that is often true depending on the manufacturer. Honda rarely through the year has big rebates. If there's like a $2,000 rebate on a car from Honda, something is wrong. They just don't do things that way. They tend to have 0% financing or really aggressive lease deals at the end of the year, as well as other times of the year. And we've been seeing that for 2020. The manufacturers, their big incentives have been these low APRs or 0% APRs, often with deferred payments. You don't have to make that first month payment for 3 months. We're already seeing that continue into November. And I think that's what's going to dominate the incentives going into the end of the year. Still expect, though, to see a whole lot of hype. Half of the commercials for the car sales this year, it's a lot of hype. They show the car in the driveway with the big red bow on it, and the husband or the wife, brings their spouse out. It's like, surprise, honey, I got you a car for Christmas, which is kind of a strange thing to do. Like, never buy your spouse a car for Christmas or any other birthday, anything, unless that's the exact car that they want. So never assume that what the right car is for them. It could, have some serious damage to your relationship. But kind of like the year that my dad bought my mom for Christmas a set of golf clubs. My mother doesn't play golf. My mother's never played golf. This was early in their marriage, and it's kind of a miracle that he survived that Christmas. So don't be like that. He did get much better at getting my mother gifts over the years, but people make mistakes early on in their marriage. So only buy your spouse a new car if that's exactly what they want. But I think we're going to see, a lot of these, I'm looking forward to seeing if the ads are different this year. Are they a little bit more creative? Are they more focused on how car shopping has changed due to COVID and how our whole society has changed due to COVID? So it's going to be really interesting to see if that creativity and those changes kind of get into the ads for this year. So I'm going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what exactly should your car shopping strategy be and which models out there do have some leftover 2020 inventory that you can snatch up if it's a car that you want, as well as a couple of key things that you do not want to do if you want to get a car by the end of the year. So I'll be right back after this. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of or about finding the right car at a great price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 704-248-8706. That's 704-248-8706. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Where the rubber meets the road.
Nice to meet you. Love your asphalt.
Hey, nice treads.
It's Straight Shift with the Car Chick.
Welcome back to the Straight Shift. We are talking about holiday car shopping 2020 edition. So I want to go through some car shopping strategies for 2020. And most of these points are the same things that I will preach any year. This is how you should approach any time of the year you are shopping for a new car, but especially at the end of the year. But these strategies are going to be even more important to follow this year because of the wacky market situation that we find ourselves in. And number one, start now. It's amazing how many people wait. Literally, they wait until like after Christmas to Boxing Day. They're like, oh, maybe I'll get a car by the end of the year. Or their accountants suddenly get their projections done for their business. They're like, hey, you should really buy a car through your business before the end of the year. So don't wait. Have that conversation with your accountant now. If you think that's something, buying a new car might be a tax strategy you need to implement by the end of the year. Or if you and your family are thinking about buying a new car before the end of the year, start your homework now. You really need to see, what incentives look like they're going to be in play. And many of those have already been released. As I've said, they might get sweeter in December. They might not. It really depends on the exact make and model. And even within that, the specific trim level, because, the limited model or the touring, swanky touring model might be in higher demand than the base model car. So they've got a lot of base models. And if you want a base model, great. You can get a good deal on one of those. But if you want the swanky one, they're not to be had. There aren't any good deals. Good luck finding one. So you have to do your research down to that detailed level to see what the supply and demand is in the market. And remember, the incentives do vary by geography. So when you are searching for new car incentives, either on one of the aggregate websites or specifically on the manufacturer's website, I recommend looking at both. Be sure you put in your zip code because they are very different by geography. Part of that is due to the supply and demand being different in each geography, and part of it is just due to the supply chain strategy. I'm not going to get into those details, but suffice it to say, put in your zip code, see what's going on in your area, and read all the fine print, especially if it is a leasing incentive. Lease deals always look so much better than they actually are because the monthly payment that they advertise doesn't include your taxes, doesn't include the fees. Usually is lower miles than you need. It may not be on the model or the trim level that you want, and it may include some ridiculously high down payment that you don't want to make. So read all of the minuscule fine print before you just jump on the bandwagon and say, wow, I'm going to get one of those. That's a great deal, at least for $199 a month. Yeah, does not happen in real life. And this is your opportunity, like I said, to really research the supply and demand for the specific vehicle you're interested in. Get on the website for some dealers in your area and look up the exact model and trim level, bells and whistles, even the colors. If you want a specific color, if you only want a white and tan car, look and see if there are any white and tan cars. Because I tell you, white and tan, most popular color combination for a lot of vehicles, can be hard to find. So get out there and see what do they really have on their lot. And look, do they have 2020s on the lot? Do they have 2021s? Do they have a combination of each? And be sure you understand, what are the changes to that vehicle between the two model years? Do they carry over relatively unchanged, or is there a significant redesign, or they've added some features that are important to you? So you're like, well, I'm not going to get as good of a deal, but I want the stuff that's in the 2021 model. This is all the homework that I tell you you absolutely have to do. So if the supply of the vehicle that you want is really low, then don't wait. Start aggressively shopping now, because you may find that you have to wait for one. You may have to order one. And like I said a few weeks ago on a podcast, I have ordered more cars this year than I have ever ordered, I think, in a combination of the last 15 years, because the inventory just isn't there. And I'm about to order another one. I'm about to order a Mini Cooper for a client out in California. So we probably won't get until February or March. So that whole strategy has not gone the way we want, but it is what it is. And she's not willing to settle for the available inventory out there. She wants what she wants, and I totally support that. I don't believe in settling if you don't have to. And so we're just going to wait and order what we want. This is a good time to really push for more money for your trade. Depending on the model you're looking for, if you're buying something that's really hot in the market and the dealers are just not dealing on them and there's not a ridiculous number of incentives, and you might have to pay a little more for that car than you would ideally want, but you're trading in a decent vehicle, really push the negotiating towards that trade, because they do have more flexibility on how much they give you for your trade. And like I said earlier, used car inventory is also low. So dealers are desperate for good quality used cars. And this is where, if your vehicle is not the type of car that that dealer can really sell well on their lot, it's like maybe you're buying a Subaru and you have a Honda to trade, and the Subaru dealer just cannot sell late model Hondas, that's okay. Go down the street to the Honda store and be like, hey, do you want to buy my car outright? What do you give me for it? If your car is older and is higher miles, for example, the Audi store that I have ordered an S5 for one of my clients, really beautiful car. They didn't want his 2007 Infiniti. It's a really nice car, but it's not something that, it's under $10,000. It is not going to sell on the big fancy Audi lot. But I found a smaller private used car dealer in the area that does specialize in older, higher mile, but still luxury cars. And they offered $2,000 more for it than the Audi store did. So shop your car to the dealer that you think is going to give the most money for it. You don't just have to trade it in. The small dealers especially are really desperate for inventory because there's so little going through the auctions right now, and they're not getting the same number of trades that your big franchise dealers do. So these guys are really freaking desperate, and you can take advantage of that and get more for your old car and still help them out by giving them the inventory that they need for their lot. So shop it around. This is an area where you can probably get a good quote deal if you are trading in a decent used car. And finally, look at all of your special financing options. As I said, the incentives are most likely going to be on the financing side versus the giganimous rebate side. Lexus, for example, has announced 0% for 60 months on all their new cars, which is awesome. But they've also announced 1.9% on the certified pre-owned models. So even if you're not buying a new car by the end of the year, you may still be able to get some good finance rates on a gently used one, on a certified pre-owned model. So that is definitely something that you want to check out. Now, here are some 2020 models that you might find left over on dealer lots in your area. This is based on research that I did this morning. So it is accurate as of about 3 hours ago. And I did try to take a snapshot of the whole United States, which is not easy to do. But in general, this is kind of what I found. There are some leftover 2020 Toyota Camrys. There's a handful of Highlanders, but since those were redesigned for the 2020 model year, they sold pretty well. But I was kind of surprised that there were still a few out there. And there were some Avalons out there for 2020, and they actually have some decent rebates on the leftover 2020 Avalons. Rebates are also pretty rare for Toyota. So if you want a large, comfortable, reliable sedan, especially if you're tall, you got really long legs, Avalon's a good vehicle. There are a few Mazda CX5s left over, but they are also starting to get a lot of the 2021. So that's one where you've got both model years on the lot. So if there's a 2020 that meets your specs, you may be able to get a better deal on that. And the Mazda CX5 is a fantastic small SUV. I buy a boatload of those things. They're great. Mitsubishi has a lot of Outlanders, Outlander Sports. They also have a lot of Mirages, but that's because that car sucks. It's like a soda can. So not surprised that there's a bunch of those on the lot. Interestingly enough, a lot of the less expensive cars still have a lot of leftovers because the people that tend to buy those are not as financially strong, and they are the people that have been more impacted by the pandemic. They've lost their jobs. They're struggling a little bit more. So the manufacturers that cater to those folks normally are not able to sell the cars because, those folks are struggling. And of course, we are keeping them in our thoughts and hopefully doing everything business people can to create new jobs for them. But that's one reason why you might see some more inexpensive cars still left over for 2020. A lot of work trucks and vans, commercial vehicles are left over for 2020. So if your accountant does say, hey, this would be a great time to buy a car, take the tax deduction for the end of the year, if you need a commercial work truck or a commercial work van, there are a good number of 2020 models left over for that. Chevy has some Malibus left over. They've got the little teeny weeny Chevy Trax, which I call a micro SUV. I don't particularly care for it, but they've got a lot of them left over. And again, I think that's because it's not been as popular a vehicle and the price point is targeted to folks that might not be in a financial position to buy right now. There's huge rebates on the leftover 2020 Bolt EVs because nobody's buying them. There's also some good rebates on the leftover Equinoxes. So Chevy's got some good deals. That's typically true of the American manufacturers. They tend to have bigger rebates to sell their cars versus the stronger finance incentives that your Asian brands tend to have. Ford, kind of the same boat. They have a bunch of trucks still left over. They have weird, complicated incentives. Ford and GM both. Ford, I think, is the worst. So be sure to read all the fine print. They may advertise $6,000 worth of rebates, but if you actually read through them, no one person actually qualifies for all of those. So you have to really do your homework on that. They do have some leftover 2020 Explorers, it looks like, that have some good rebates. But again, you have to look at those with a fine-tooth comb to see if you actually qualify for all of them. Some of your Asian brands do have some leftovers. I'm surprised Honda actually has a good number of 2020 models left over. Their push into the 2021s was delayed, so we're still seeing a fair number of 2020 Accords, Civics, some CRVs, some HRVs, and yet a lot of the 2021s are starting to hit the lot. So they're definitely right now in their changeover time, and they've got some decent lease incentives and finance incentives to help get rid of those outgoing 2020 models. And that's typical for end of year for Honda. Hyundai is one of the brands that's actually done really well this year. Their sales have only been down like 7 or 8% versus the 20 to 25 most everybody else had. And a lot of that's due to the strength of the Palisade, which is still selling like hotcakes. And they have a new calligraphy trim level for this year that is super duper swank, but good luck getting one. They are into the 2021s on almost everything. There's a handful of 2020s here and there left over, but they've got some good incentives on the new 2021s, including the little Kona small SUV, little tiny SUV that I dearly love. Lots of 0% APRs, some really strong lease deals. They're really still bringing it out there because they want to continue to make the sales. Hyundai's goal has always been to eat up market share from Honda and Toyota, and they are definitely doing it. Nissan has some huge rebates, like on the Leaf electric car, again, because nobody buys it. But they've also got some deals on leftover Pathfinders and Armadas. So if you need a larger SUV, those are definitely out there. Kia has some really killer rebates as well as 0% APR and some good lease deals on their leftover Cadenzas, as well as the leftover Sorrentos, which sales of those are down because, the Telluride came out and it's the hottest thing on the market. And don't expect to get any good deals on those at all. They are still selling for $4,000 and $5,000 over sticker. I was looking to see if maybe we could get a certified pre-owned model. Granted, they just came out in 2020, so finding a used one is really hard, but there were a few out there that looked to have been either loaner cars or maybe dealer demos. But even used, they are $3,000 and $4,000 over what their original MSRP was. I was looking, I'm like, why is this? It's advertised for 39 grand. And so I pulled up the original window sticker. It was a year-old car, had like 15, 20,000 miles on it. Like, why is that 39 grand for this trim level? And the original sticker said, 35,800. I'm like, so $4,000 over the original sticker and it's used. Nope, not doing it. Just can't do it. It is a really nice car though. In the luxury trims, Acura has some leftover MDXs. Granted, the MDX has some issues, again, with the stupid infotainment system that's been plaguing Honda and Acura. Volvo actually has some really big rebates on even the new 2021 XC90s, along with some 0% financing and some decent lease deals. So if you're a fan of the XC90, looks like you can get a pretty good deal on some of those from Volvo. Keep in mind that if there is a rebate and a 0% APR advertised, they are almost always either or. You don't get to do both. You can pick one, but not both of them. So be sure you do the math based on how much you plan to put down and how long you plan to finance the car, and if you're going to actually finance it for the full term or if you plan to pay it off early, because sometimes it's better to take the rebates and sometimes it's better to take the 0%. So do the math both ways to make sure you know what is best for you. If the cars do have some great lease deals, great rebates and aggressive pricing for leftover 2020s, you need to ask yourself why. Because again, like I mentioned, things like the Mitsubishi Mirage, the Nissan Leaf, is there a model year changeover and they're just trying to get rid of the 2020s? Or was it a crappy car and nobody bought it and they're desperate to get rid of it? In which case, you just don't necessarily want to do that. Another strategy that I always recommend, but I think it's going to be even more important this year, is don't wait to the last minute. I've said it already. I'm going to say it again. Don't get to December 26th and be like, I think I want a car by the end of the year. You can, but there's always a gamble that the inventory will be depleted and you're not going to get what you want. You're going to have to settle for a color combination that you don't love, or not get all the bells and whistles that you want, or you may not even be able to get the car that you wanted because they're gone. There's not any, and you'll have to wait until actual 2021 to get one. That's a greater risk this year because of the inventory situation. The other problem is that anytime you wait until the last minute, and this year the incentives are going to go through January 3rd because New Year's Day falls on a Friday. So the year-end incentives will actually go to January 3rd. The dealers are going to get 3 extra days to make their quotas in their sales. But anytime you wait till last minute, expect to sit your butt down at that dealership for hours. And that's annoying in good times, but because of COVID, that's a bigger risk. Dealers have gone a lot more to the online shopping because people have been doing the online shopping just for safety reasons. And they're realizing, hey, this is kind of convenient. And I think the dealers are getting a lot better at responding quickly to those internet sales. But when push comes to shove, they are always going to give priority to the person whose butt is actually standing there in front of them in person in their dealership. So That's another reason of why I always say take your time, plan ahead, start now so that you can do it all online so that you're not wasting your holiday time sitting in a car dealership, but especially now when it's a little bit riskier to do so. And finally, don't just buy a car for, quote, the deal. If it's not the right vehicle for you, then it's not a good deal. I don't care if you saved $6,000 or $7,000 on the car. If it's a crappy car or it doesn't suit your needs and support your lifestyle and do what you need it to do, and you end up hating it, then you really didn't save any money because you're going to be unhappy and it's going to drive you nuts. And you're probably going to want to get out of it early, in which case you're going to probably lose your butt anyway. So remember, getting a great deal starts with picking the right car in the first place. So if you are interested in having me help you get a new car by the end of the year, please contact me before the end of November. Normally, I don't accept any new car buying clients after December 15th. This year, I don't know that I'm going to be accepting any new ones in December at all. If you don't get a contract signed by the end of November, I may not have the bandwidth to help you get a car by the end of the year. So just throwing that out there because I want to be totally transparent and honest. I want to be able to give all my clients my highest service, but I can only do that for so many people a month. And I have a feeling that the end of the year this year is going to be as reflectively crazy as the rest of the year has been for me. So I want to make sure that I'm able to serve my clients to the best of my ability. Now, another great resource for you is A Girl's Guide to Cars.com. This is one of the top automotive blogs in the world. Yes, it is by women for women, but guys, kind of suck it up because the information's really good. And, if your masculinity can handle it, it's a great resource for you. I highly encourage it. I'm deeply honored to have been asked by the owner, Scotty, to become a featured columnist. So I now have a monthly car buying column with them where I'm doling out a lot of this advice to everybody around the world. But it's a really great resource. They have fantastic vehicle reviews. They really look at cars from all of the different lifestyle angles of what you might need, products, the cars themselves. It's just a fantastic resource. So be sure to check it out, A Girl's Guide to Cars.com. I hope this has been helpful for everybody. Whatever holidays you and your family celebrate this time of year, I hope you have a great time, a fun time, and most importantly, I hope everyone stays safe out there. So until next time, I'm out of here.
The Straight Shift Podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, the Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or the Car Chick.